Good morning, Facebookers. I'm going to wait until I get a couple of followers before I start. I wanted to have a brief history lesson because I noticed over the weekend I seen people with red, white, and blue on. I seen posts about Happy Memorial Days. But our Memorial Day started on May 31st and ended on June 1st, 1921. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief history lesson because I find it funny that we go to school all our lives and we learn about their history. And nowhere in them history books do they teach us about our history. So I wanted to give a little education on something that's very, very important to the black community. And I don't really like the word black because we're not a color. I prefer of African descent. But like I said, we need to know about the black community and our black history. Because a lot of people don't know that on this very day in 1921 was one of the worst massacres on U.S. soil against black people. It was the worst race riot in our history. They tell you about the Holocaust, something that did not happen here on our soil. Something that did not happen here with our people, but they neglected to put in our history books about what took place in 1921 in America, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on this very day. On this day is the day that us as a whole, as people, as black people, need to remember Black Wall Street. Because on this day was the beginning of the destruction of Black Wall Street. And so many of us don't know nothing about Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street was a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that homed 15,000 African Americans. 15,000. And on that day, they destroyed everything we built, everything we worked for, everything we accomplished. Now, let me give you a little background on the Greenboroughs neighborhood. Back then, it was during segregation. And back then, it was the freeing of the slaves, but we weren't really free because we were still segregated. We were limited. So what they did is they said, okay, the ones who want to be free, we're going to set them up and we're going to put them in this neighborhood. So there was a track that separated the blacks from the whites. The blacks weren't allowed to cross the tracks to interact with the whites or shop in their neighborhoods or do anything in their neighborhoods. And the whites weren't allowed to cross the tracks to do it in the black neighborhood. Not that they wanted to. So what the black people did, they said, you know what? We're going to be our own source. We're going to be our own force. We're going to build everything up on our own. And they did. They more than built up. This was during the oil industry. At the time, the oil industry was doing very good. But once again, these black people were put there as a punishment because the white people thought that these niggers are going to need us. They're going to become our slaves once again. But the black people said, you know what? We're going to help one another out. We're going to build one another up. You don't understand the depths of Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street had 6 private planes, 21 churches, 30 grocery stores, a hospital, 2 public schools, a post office, their own law enforcement system, their own policing system. Hold on, Juan. I'm going to get to your answer in a minute. Let me just get through this. We had 2 movie theaters. One was very famous. It was the Williams Dreamland Theater. We had a whole bus system that was owned and operated by one of the famous doctors in that town, Dr. Berry. We had banks, we had hotels, we had funeral homes, we had nightclubs, We had jewelry stores. We had everything. Every source that we need, all our needs and our wants, we provided for ourselves. Our ancestors did that. Ours. And it all started about in 1910. And then later on, around the 1920s, before it even got to 1921, the oil industry had a plumage. And a lot of the white people on the other side of that track started losing jobs and losing money and couldn't support their family and couldn't support their homes. But the problem is it did not affect the black people in their community, what they built. Do you know that back then, the dollar circulated an estimate of 100 times in their community before it left? Let me break that math down to you. 100 times before it left the community. It took about 1 year, one whole year, 365 days before the dollar left out of that community. Do you know today in 2017, it takes a dollar between 15 minutes and 6 hours to leave our community? Do you know that I can sit in front of a bunch of people and they can tell me about every Jordan drop date, every Nike drop date, about Polo, Burberry, Gucci, cars, and all of this, but they can't tell me anything about our history. Now, don't get it twisted. I kind of blame the education system for the simple fact that they're too busy teaching us their history, and they don't want us to know about our history and the powers we held and the strengths we have. But as a person, I need to educate myself on things, as should everybody else educate their self on things. But our youth nowadays, they don't even want to pick up a book and read, let alone research something. The history books forgot to tell us about Black Wall Street. Just like they forgot to tell us about James Armstead in 1781 and his involvement of the American Revolution. Just like they forgot to talk to us about Peter Salem and educate us about his victory and his contribution to the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. Or how about William Neal? They neglected to inform us that in 1885, he had great contributions to the colored patriots of the American Revolution. See, our history books tell us what they want us to hear and what they want us to know because we were conditioned that way. We were conditioned that way. Our ancestors was conditioned during slavery, during the seasoning process, and when they was brought to America. And just like they talk about PTSD in soldiers, they trained them to be one way, and when they come back from war, they don't detrain them. Well, they trained our ancestors to think, act, and feel one way, and they never detrained our ancestors. So all of that negative knowledge and that conditioned process, it was just passed down through the generations. And that's why as black people, we can't get it right. But the irony of Black Wall Street is when after they bombed us, and I say bombed because people don't know this history. People don't know the history because it all started on May 31st, 1921 with Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old shoe shine boy. And he had to go up in a building to do a service. And at the time, they had those operated elevators with the switch handles. And they had elevator operators. And a girl named Sarah Page, who was 17 years old, was working on this elevator as the elevator operator. And when Dick Rowland tried to get off the elevator, he tripped and put his hand out to catch his balance and accidentally touched her. And she screamed rape. And they came and they arrested him. And a lynch mob came to hang him, to kill him, to steal his life from him, all because of what this white woman said, this white girl said. Not that there was proof or evidence behind it, but back then we didn't have no say. What a white person says was golden. Because they didn't consider us as humans anyway. Back then we were considered 3/6 of a human. We were not considered as a whole. You understand what I'm saying? So when the black community of Greenboro, of Tulsa, Oklahoma found out about this, the men that came home as heroes, that served in these wars for this country, that don't give a damn about us, those men, they grabbed they armed themselves up and they grabbed their guns and they went down to the courthouse in defense of Dick Rowland. So when they got there, the lynch mob was there and they're sitting on the county courts, and the police came to the black people and said, you need to go. And they said, we're not going nowhere because this man is being unlawfully tried. And this white cop, he stood about 5'5", and he stood in front of this black man that was about 6'2", 250 pounds. And he said, listen, boy, what you think you're going to do with that rifle? And he said, I'm going to shoot somebody if you don't let that man go. And that was the start of it. And in 16 hours, it started on May 31st, 1921. It ended on June 1st, 1921. And in 16 hours, they ran through this black community and they burnt everything to the ground. But the irony of it all is not only did they burn everything to the ground, they didn't just attack them on foot by the Ku Klux Klan and the local enforcement agency. One of the planes from World War I flew over this town and dropped firebombs onto this city. They killed 3,000 African Americans that day, and counting. And I say in counting because after they confirmed the 3,000 were killed, not only did they kill them, the black people in that community, they arrested 6,000 black people and held them in a concentration camp for 8 days. And some of these people were injured and died there because of neglected medical attention. But they don't tell you this in our history book. They don't want to educate us on our history. They don't want you to know that the things that they did to us did not stop when they passed the 13th Amendment that freed the slaves. They don't want you to know these things. They don't want you to have this knowledge because they know that if we could rebuild and we could come together and join how they did during that time, that we will be unstoppable. And they need to have that control over us. They need to have us mentally controlled and physically controlled. They need to disable us from using all the strength that we have to really better ourselves, to really educate ourselves, to really transform ourselves into something great. I know it was regards to the voting system and it had everything to do with the Constitution. The Constitution was actually written after slavery ended and not, it was written after slavery ended, not before slavery ended. So when the Constitution was made, it really wasn't made in regards to us, and it did have to do, it actually had to do with voting, not the civil rights movement. It had to do with voting so that slave owners didn't have so much power and so much control, because if the slave owners were able to count every slave, which technically back then black people were not persons, they were property. And up in the North said, okay, if they can count their slaves as a person when you consider them property, then we should be able to count our homes and our businesses. So it started a whole epidemic. So that's where the 3/5, 3/6 clause came from. But you know what I'm getting at though. But back to Black Wall Street, because this is a history lesson on today on what we need to remember. We were all out celebrating Memorial Day. We were all out, and don't get me wrong, and I don't want anybody to get offensive, and I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, because I have family members that have served for the U.S. Army and the Marines. I have a cousin that recently died in Afghanistan. So I don't take away anything, any contribution that they did for our country. Because if people don't know, at one point in history, black people made up 12% of the U.S. Army, of the U.S. that was fighting in the wars. We made up 12% of it. So like I said, I don't want to take from that, but I just want to drop some knowledge and help people understand that we sit here and we celebrate Memorial Day and we celebrate 4th of July and we celebrate Christmas and Thanksgiving and all these other things. And then they try to satisfy us Negroes. And they say, you know what, let's give them a month to shut them up. But they chose the shortest month in the history of the calendar to give us. And then during that month in the school, to satisfy us little Negroes, they teach us about the same people. They teach us about Martin Luther King Jr. They teach about Maya Angelou. They teach us about Harriet Tubman. They don't teach you about anybody else outside that. Do you know there was thousands of African-American inventors in this country, stuff that we use on a daily basis that a lot of people don't, is not even informed that the things that you're using was made by one of us. So like I said, it's not to take from anybody. It's just to help people understand, because I have conversations all the time about Black Wall Street and people don't know what the hell I'm talking about. They've never heard of a Black Wall Street. They had no knowledge about Black Wall Street and what took place during Black Wall Street, meaning they have no knowledge of their history. They've never even thought to think about it, look it up, or get informed about it. The sole purpose of this live is to educate, to wake up the people, to help you understand that if you do not instill certain knowledge to yourself and want that knowledge and go out and get that knowledge, you will never understand a lot of things. And most importantly, you would just be a follower, because you just take the word of what these people are telling us or what they put in a history book, which is inaccurate. It's falsified documentation. So it's like we go to school, we do what they tell us to do. It's a modern day form of slavery. Like, yes, master, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to learn your history. I'm not going to educate myself on anything outside of this history, because this is something that you told me that I need to learn, that I need to do. Now, I'm not saying don't get an education, because the worst thing you can do is be a Black person in America and be uneducated, because a Black person with knowledge and education in a book is more dangerous than a Black person with a gun. And people don't understand these things. But I just felt like Black Wall Street is a prime example of how we were great, we still are great, and we can get that greatness back. Now, I'm not saying us, because we're kind of too old to really build Black Wall Street, to really get that bondage within our community, but we can start, and we can instill certain things in our children, and they can instill certain things in our grandchildren, and hopefully when it's our grandchildren's time, that they have that knowledge, they have that will, they have that drive and that passion to start to rebuild it up, because it ain't gonna happen overnight. We got too many problems within our own minds, within our own selves, and within our own communities. But we need to start repairing these things now. Because if not for us, for our children and our grandchildren's future. Because at the rate we're going, we're not getting anywhere. The same thing that was happening back in those times is the same thing that's still happening now. It just is a different form. We're still getting lynched. We might not be hanging from a rope, but what's the difference between the law enforcement back then hanging us from trees and them now shooting us dead in the street on video and not getting convicted? What's the difference? And I understand, I had an argument recently, well, not an argument, but a debate about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And I had to explain to this person that you're taking two different activists from two different sides of the northern hemisphere, and you're comparing them, but they're not compatible. The person said that Martin Luther King Jr. was a sellout and that he rides with Malcolm X. And I agree with the riding with the Malcolm X, because he was all about action and trying to forward things. But what people don't understand is, and I'm speaking from some semi-experience, because my mother's side of the family is from Montgomery, Alabama, baby. And where my mama lived, there was a Ku Klux Klan house down the road. Their little social club. You understand? And the South, it was totally different from up here in North. Malcolm X up here, he had to deal with the the state police departments and the federal government. Down there, Martin Luther King had to deal with the state police officers and the local officials and the federal government. But the only difference is, down there, those police officers, they were the Ku Klux Klan. Those firefighters that came out to put them burning crosses on your lawn, they were the Ku Klux Klan. Them city officials, them government officials, they were the Ku Klux Klan. They were not that up here in the Northern Hemisphere because slavery and segregation was different in the South versus in the North. Hence why so many people wanted to leave the South and come to the North, because the North had a little bit more movement. They had a little bit more leadway. They had a little bit more room to breathe. They didn't endure the things in the North that the people in the South went through. So you can't compare Martin Luther King Jr. with Malcolm X, because they were on two different plateaus. They experienced two different things. Now, had Malcolm X came down to the South and stayed here for a while and experienced things, baby, honey, I bet you he would have had a little bit of compromise in him. Because you can't stand in the middle, in the front of your followers and get gunned down and get defeated and expect them to keep in your footsteps. Because that right there is a discouragement. I'm following this man, and look what happened to him. So maybe I should just go run, hide, and scared, because I don't want to end up like him. You got to understand the difference between the South during slavery time and the North. So you can't sit in front of me and you can't compare Martin Luther King to Malcolm X, because they were from two different sides of the tracks. The Black Panther Party ain't never really came across the Ku Klux Klan. And if they did, they would have been outnumbered. But it still doesn't make it right, because our history shows the bias. The Black Panther Party got raided by the federal government, and when they raided them in their clubhouse, they made them pull their pants down, and they discriminated against them, and they humiliated them. And that was a conditioning mechanism that they did to belittle them, to discredit them, to disgrace them. Because the Ku Klux Klan was not as heavy in the North as it was in the South. So that was their version of being the Ku Klux Klan. You understand what I'm saying? But in the South, when everything and everybody around you is the Ku Klux Klan, it's not much you can get away with, and it's not much you can do. The only thing that you can do is ask for some type of compromise. Come to some type of agreement. And I know most black people will say, well, that's a sellout move. But if you're not here to fight the good fight, who's going to fight it for you? Because our history shows that these people could do anything to us in our communities and get away with it. And we can't even walk down the public street without getting harassed, without getting accused, without fitting the description. You understand what I'm saying? So let's just understand the history. Just like recently I took a biology class. And I had an argument with my professor. And I want to bring this up because this goes beyond. This goes prior to slavery. On my test, it had a question. And it said, what is the connection between hemophiliac, Haitians, and HIV? And I said to her, excuse me, I can't answer this correctly because it does not have the correct answer on this multiple choice question. And she said it 100% absolutely does. And I said, well, I'm not going to answer it, but after class, I need to speak with you. And when we finished the test, I said, let me explain something to you, honey. Because I've read your documentation, my study guide. And I said, it said that in the 1800s is when it was the start of AIDS. And I told her, do you know what happened in the 1800s? And she said, yes, I do. I said, okay, that was slavery time. And she said, AIDS originated in Africa. And I said, how? Enlighten me. Because there's only two ways to get AIDS. And that's through sexual intercourse and needles, contaminated blood. And she goes on to tell me that, well, they think that it started with chimpanzees. And let me tell you this, chimpanzees, even if they thought, which is not a fact, it's an assumption, it's a theory, it's a hypothesis. Even if you thought that it started with chimpanzees, how did the black people get it? And I had to say, let me stop you there before you continue on. I said the only way for a human being to get AIDS from a chimpanzee is if they had sexual contact. And I said, and I don't mean to be rude, but fornicating with animals is a white people thing. That is not a black person's thing. And she said, well, when the Africans went to the Caribbean islands for vacation, I said, let me stop you there again, because no Africans were going to any Caribbean islands for vacation because they didn't have the means or the monies to travel. So you mean when your people on your boats came to Africa, gathered the slaves and brought them to America? I said, but let me ask you this. Do you know what happened between the transport of Africans from Africa to America? She said, no, I don't. I said, let me enlighten you. There was a process called seasoning of the slaves. And the first stop in seasoning of the slaves was Hades. And after they went to Hades the first couple of times, they started going to the other Caribbean islands. And one of the ways, the ways that they seasoned the slaves is they seasoned you, which was a process to mentally, physically, and spiritually train you to become a slave. And in one of those processes was the white slave masters and capturers were raping the Africans that they brought to Hades and the other Caribbean islands to season. They raped them, both men and women. And I had to tell her, so let me explain this to you. In your paperwork, it says that they went there on vacation to have sexual same gender intercourse in these places, which was false. Because we didn't willingly have sexual intercourse with these people. They were raped. That was one of the process of seasoning of the slaves. And in the process, they did the same things to some of the Haitians and some of the Caribbean people in Jamaica and everything. And if you ever notice, Caribbean people are very anti-homosexuality. Not because they hate the person, but because it reminds them of the history and the things that happened. So once they went to these Caribbean islands, and they seasoned them and they conditioned them, then they brought them to America, thus leaving the trail of AIDS from Africa to Hades to Caribbean islands and back to America. But they don't teach you this in your history books, because in your history books, they don't want you to know how they were, how evil and malicious and deceptive they are, and all that they have done to us to break us down physically, mentally, and spiritually. So when I talk about Black Wall Street, you got to understand where we came from in 1800s, even though they tell you slavery started in 1800s, but the first slave really ever was in 1621. But they don't tell you this in your history books. But what we endured from the first slave up until the 1910s, where we were saying, okay, we're segregated, we're going to build each other up, we're going to have wealth, and we're going to have power. And then they destroyed us. And after they destroyed us, the people who were left, they attempted to rebuild Black Wall Street. And you know what the white people did? They said, you know what? We're going to end segregation in this town. We're going to tear those gates down. We're going to let whoever wants to cross those tracks, because they needed the black community to money, and the black community fell for it. And they started going across the tracks to the white people area, spending their money over there, and decreased their revenue. During Black Wall Street, do you know that there were $46 million in damages conducted by these white people? Now think about that number. In 1921, 46 million in damages. We're talking about a community that had 6 private planes, 21 churches, 30 grocery stores, a bus system, jewelry stores, homes. They had 2 public schools. Do I think segregation is a good thing? In a way, I kind of think it is. And in a way, I kind of think it's not. And I say this because I feel like if we can rebuild Black Wall Street, that would be a form of segregation. And I think that will be awesome for us, because that will allow us to build up our revenue. Because once again, I got to bring a history lesson into it. Back then, when the freedom of the slaves happened and they desegregated segregated us, Africans in the world money made up 1.5% of the monies in the world. 1.5% of the monies in the world. Now we fast forward to 2017. African Americans money combined still make up 1.5% of the monies in the world. We had not progressed at all. No progress whatsoever. 1.5% then and 1.5% now. We don't even make up 10% of the monies in the world. So, do I think segregation can be a great thing for us to rebuild and get back Black Wall Street and make a difference and generate our revenue and give us a little bit more power? Because without money, you have no power in this country, because this country is about the almighty dollar. That's the most important thing in this country. Not the people in this country, not what's done to this country, not the people who serve this country, but the dollar that they can generate from those in this country. So yes, I do think segregation can be a great thing, but then at the same time, we'll never have our true freedom, our true equality, and our true happiness with segregation, because the government will control the segregation. The government will say, okay, you want to be segregated, so you stay over there, and you can't come over here. But over there is this much, and over there is this much. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like a catch-22. But once again, I'm not here to debate slavery. I'm not here to debate anything. I'm just here to inform my people, my culture, about what our ancestors went through, how great they were, what they accomplished, and what we can accomplish for our future. And if you don't gain anything else from this live, I will hope you will just leave with some type of knowledge of our history and want to be more informed on our history, want to go out and learn more about us. Because it's so funny when I talk, and I'm always stopping people and talking to them about Black Wall Street and Black people as a whole and slavery and Black versus white. I'm always talking to people about this. And friends and family, they roll their eyes and they say, oh God, you want to be a Black Panther. Here you go, you're so pro-Black. And my favorite one, and this was said to me a couple of times, is the reason why you're so pro-Black and you go so hard for Black people is because it makes you feel more Black. I don't know what that means. I don't know what more Black means. Because if you're Black, you're Black. Just like in slavery time, a nigga's a nigga. It don't matter if that nigga had a drop of white in him or a drop of Black in him. In the white people eyes, you they little nigga. So I don't know what more Black is. I don't know how me loving my ethnicity and loving my heritage and spreading the knowledge that I received to my Black people that I know that they don't have, because I didn't learn it in school. I had to learn it for myself. I don't know what more Black means. The same thing as I don't know what good hair means. When people go, oh, you got good hair. What does that mean? Oh, are you mixed because you have good, what is good hair? Just how I would ask you what is good hair, I'm going to ask you what is more Black. I don't know what that means. And then I love when people say, oh, well, why is it, this is my favorite, because during school, the white girls in my school say, why does everything have to be a Black and white thing? Why do you always have to talk about Black issues? Let me explain something to you. If me talking about my culture and my history and my ethnicity bothers you or makes you uncomfortable, that just shows me you're in a racism, honey. Because you have everything handed to you out on a silver platter, and we have to work hard for what we want and what we earn. Nothing is given to us easily. Not even the so-called welfare system that our own people degrade each other with or make fun of. Nothing is handed to us. Everything has a price tag attached to it. And my favorite line is when white people say, well, I don't see color. You don't see color. So I had to look at her and I said, you don't see color? She said, no. I said, so tell me this. If you don't see color, what the fuck do you do at a traffic light? She said, oh, I don't understand the question. If you don't see color, what the fuck do you do at a traffic light? Because if you don't see color, you can't go for green or stop for red, honey. I know the Black Panther Party created the welfare system on, as well as the free breakfast program and the free lunch program for our children because of the poverty state that we were in. But yet our own kind today makes fun of other people who get any type of assistance. These people say, oh, she's on Section 8, well, she's doing welfare where she collects food stamps, or they get on here and they front like, oh, I need food stamps. Who got food stamps to me? Oh, I don't get Medicaid. And when they really do. But the most thing that I laugh about the most is, even if you don't get it today, bitch, you grew up on it. You want to know why? Because the majority of us are 80s babies. And you know what that means. Majority of us, their parents were crackheads, and they were most likely crack babies. Not to bash anybody, but it's the truth. I'm going to speak the truth. You grew up on welfare. You grew up on Medicaid, and you grew up on food stamp. You grew up in that goddamn system. And if your parents wasn't on drugs, they were selling the drugs. And you know what they did? They had the wives and the baby mothers and the girlfriend collect from the government and say, no, we're going to get that free money after everything we went through. And we're going to still collect this money that we generating, even though we're polluting our own community with the very same drugs that the white people planted here for us to pollute our community with, to form our own form of genocide. But once again, you have to know your history in order to understand these things, to be able to link these things and to be able to get around these things, to progress from these things, to grow from these things. But no, our community, we choose to bash each other. We choose to talk about each other, lie on each other, steal from each other, kill each other. It's no love. But I don't blame us. I blame them. I blame the history. I blame what was passed down from generation to generation to generation. We was never unconditioned. We was never trained or taught. The welfare system was not only designed, the Black Panther Party created it, but the white government said, you know what? We're going to let them have this, but we're going to tweak that system. We're going to add our conditions to it. We don't want this black man growing up in this household with his wife and his children, or his girl and his children. We don't want these children to have a father figure, because we need them to grow up to be animals. So we can still treat them like slaves. So we can still treat them like trash, dirt, dehumanize them. So even what we create, they try to turn against us. No matter what the positive effect behind the creation was, they will always try to turn it against us. That goes back to your segregation question. So the only thing we can do is come together and try to build to the best of our ability. And the first step is remembering Black Wall Street, to know it, to acknowledge it, to accept it, to learn from it, to build on top of it. That's the only thing we can do. But I'm hot. I need to get in another shower. So I'm going to end this live. But before I end this live, I want you to forever remember May 31st, 1921, and June 1st, 1921. So just how all weekend I saw in my timeline, Happy Memorial Day, I should see a hell of a lot of hashtags, remember Black Wall Street. Happy Black Wall Street Day. Never forget Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street will forever live on. That's what I should see on my timeline. Because I saw a hell of a lot of Happy Memorial Day. I saw a whole lot of red, white, and blues. Well, show me your black, red, and greens, please. You have a day to go purchase these things. Just pretend like it's the new Jordans or the new Nikes Air Max 97s dropping. Can y'all do that? Can you know your history? Can you love your history? Could you want the knowledge of your history? That's all up to you. But I'm out of here.